Hi, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Now I'm going to be going over and just highlighting some areas in the CDFM module 1.2 Manpower Management. This is out of the 2018 study guide. All right, so you start with understanding the mission of the Department of Defense. Again, everything that we do, all the resources that we receive is based on this mission to provide the forces necessary to deter war and provide security for our country. There are 3 military departments, 16 defense agencies, and 4 armed services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. So the military is responsible for manning, equipping, and training the forces that are needed, but operational chain of command to control the forces belong to the Unified Combatant Commanders. This is going to be important as you understand, and when you talked about the flow of funds and the priority for funding and resources, manpower, it goes to these combatant commanders, tying back to the mission of the Department of Defense. So the first priority for programming goes to those major combatant commands based on the Joint Chief of Staff guidance. So who's the Joint Chief of Staff? That's the senior military advisors to the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, and the President. So that's why the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you have a chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, but their job is to provide the military guidance, because your president and your Secretary of Defense are both civilians. So you need a military advisor to advise them on military and combat operations. So you've probably heard this term before, Future Year Defense Program, FYDP, FYDP. That's the DoD database that keeps track of all the resources necessary to accomplish a mission. And that database is broken down into 11 major force programs. And all those force programs, meaning every mission that the military does or the Department of Defense does, may be applied to one of those 11 major force programs. So it includes all the MDEPs, the manpower, the equipment, all the resources necessary to fund those major programs. So presidential authority to activate reserve forces. So what type of authority does the president have? Because remember, we said in Article 1 that Congress has the ability to declare war and raise taxes and all of these great things. But the president also has some authority to activate reserve forces. So when or how does that authority apply? So under Title 10 U.S. Code, that's the law 12304, it gives the president the right to activate forces, but there are certain conditions. He can activate forces without consent of Congress for mission that it must be a use or threatened use of a weapon of mass destruction or an actual terrorist attack. If those conditions occur, the president can automatically activate reserve forces to try to combat or to secure operations. So he can order the forces to duty not more than a year, 365 days. And he cannot activate no more than 200,000 members of the selective reserve and the individual ready reserve. So combine the selective reserve and the IIR, that you cannot have more than 200,000 on active duty at one time. And another stipulation is, of that 200,000, no more than 30,000 of them can be in the individual ready reserve. So those are the authorities that the president have to activate reserve forces. Weapons of mass destruction, use of or threatened use, and terrorist-related issues. Full-time equivalent. Again, we're still on manpower. So it's important that you know these definitions, because you may be given some data and they may say, well, calculate the turnover rate. What's the turnover rate? Based on the number of employees who left a position. But it's not going to be straightforward. It's going to be a scenario and you have to pull out, okay, in order for me to calculate the turnover rate, Well, I need to know the number of employees who left positions divided by the total number of positions. That is my turnover rate. And if you think about it, okay, I want to know turnover rate. So that means the number of positions I have, I need that number, and I need to know how many people left to know my turnover rate. So an example, assume you have 10 people left and you have 100 positions, that's 10% turnover rate. Likewise for the fill rate. So based on your understanding of the definition, you will know what to do, because fill rate says the average number of days from when an employee leaves to when you fill that position. Lapse rate, percentage of the year that vacancy occurred. So it's the turnover rate times the fill rate will give you. So this time this gives you your lapse rate, how long that particular position was vacant. And the number of positions to budget. So based on your budget. So if 2.5% of 100 positions are vacant during the year, therefore, you're only going to be given 97.5% of the positions to budget. So you won't be getting the budget for the all 100 positions. Only 97.5 of those positions you will receive funding for. Separation incentives. You have the early retirement program, which is known as the voluntary early retirement, the VERA, or the buyout program, which is voluntary separation incentive program, VSIP. So the DOD is permitted no more than 25,000 buyout separations per year. That's the limitation, 25K. And I think this 40K is different from the older study guide. The buyout payment, you take the lesser of 40,000 or the amount of the individual's severance pay. So of course it's always the less amount, and if it's greater than 40K, the most you're going to get is 40K in the buyout program. So an employee who accepts a buyout, you accept the money, so you get your 40K, you left, you canceled your contract, you cannot be reemployed, you have a 12-month waiting period if you want to try to go back to the government after receiving the money. So what happens if you try to get hired before then? If, let's say, somebody doesn't catch it and month 10 you got rehired, then you will owe the government the money back. I would think at least for the month 11 and month 12. So there's a 12-month waiting period. Federal activities reform. So you have Inventory Reform Act of 1988. Well, what does that say? It says that no later than the end of the third quarter of a fiscal year, each agency must submit a list. So we're talking now about positions that are inherently governmental, that the government solely responsible, or you have contractors. So the third quarter of each fiscal year, each agency, DOD and so forth, must submit a list to Office of Management and Budget, who is the resource manager for the executive branch, of all activities performed by federal sources and those functions that are not inherently governmental. OMB, Office of Management and Budget Circular A76. We've talked about OMB Circular A11, deals with the budget. OMB Circular A123. And then you have OMB Circular A76. This guidance establishes federal policies about the performance of, so this is where you get the details from the OMB's perspective on commercial activities, getting a contractor to do the job. So it's classified in two categories. The commercial activity, those government functions that are performed by a contractor, or inherently governmental activity, functions that are conducted by government employees only. And the most efficient organization. So the government structure, when you're doing a performance work statement, the government structure versus a contractor. The name of that government structure is the most efficient organization. So this, to the government's cost, is the government's cost to perform the commercial activity. So based on the performance work statement, this is the government structure that is necessary when you compare that to a contractor to see which is best for the government. Performance work statement, that's your technical breakdown of all the functions necessary to get the job done. So DODI, just like you got something from OMB, you have DODI 4100.33 that also talk about commercial activity notification. Congressional notification, if you're wanting to do a commercial activity study and it affects more than 46 or more individual DOD personnel, Congress has to be notified. Because again, depending on what the results are, these individuals' jobs may be in jeopardy. So the rule is, based on DODI 4100.33, is that if it involves 46 individuals or more, that's government employees, Congress must be notified. And so the DOD employee notification, they are notified immediately if they are affected by the cost comparison. So let's look at the OMB Circular A76 Cost Competition process. How do we determine, do we go keep it in-house or we get a contractor to do the job? Of course, this is just a straightforward method, but other things have to be considered. If we're at, let's say, a war and we need our military personnel to be elsewhere, well, maybe a inherently governmental is not even a condition. We have to go straight contractor. So certain other factors are involved. But straightforward commercial activity A76 cost competition process goes like this. As I mentioned, if it affects more than 46 individuals, Congress must be notified. That's the first and the next to last step. So before the study even begins, you request the study contract. So Congress is notified, then you request a study contract. Awarded the study contract. So once you get approval to do the study, you start that study. So based on the development of what needs to be done, you develop the inherently governmental structure. Develop the MEO. That's the government structure necessary to do this job. And at the same time, you complete the performance work statement. So sometimes you do this first. If you've ever participated in a cost study like this, is they'll come to you and you have to detail how many hours it takes you to do whatever your job requires, how many man hours, and then based on that, you develop the performance work statement. So back up to the MEO, most efficient organization, government structure, you must complete an independent review to get a cost associated with this structure. And also with the performance work statement, the contracting would then solicit bids to be able to meet this performance work statement. So you have a cost from the independent review and you get the contractor's bids to see, then you do a cost comparison. You want to see which option works best based on cost. But remember, commercial bids must be at least 10% lower than for the government to keep it in-house to be selected or even considered to be an option. So after we do our cost comparison, administrative appeals decision, because maybe we say, you know what, we're going to keep it in-house, and there's always someone from either side who's not happy, so you always have an appeals process. But once that decision is made, Congress, and the final decision is made on which way we're going to go, Congress is then notified again of what the results were of that study. And then a contract, based on what Congress says, a contract is awarded, or the most efficient organization, the government in-house, is implemented. So that is OMB Circular A76 Cost Competition process in a nutshell. All right, so let's talk about ethics. This is part of fiscal law too. Gifts. What type of gifts can we accept from outside sources? We may accept a gift from a contractor if the value is $20 or less, not to exceed $50 per year. So if that one contractor gives you a gift, $10, $15. That's good, as long as it's no more than $50 in a year and the individual gift is $20 or less. Service members and their families who are injured service members and families may accept gifts up to $8,000. If the value exceeds, then you need your ethical lawyers to come in and make written determination if you may accept the gift. Gifts between individual employees. Individual gifts to supervisors, that's subordinates to supervisors, must not be more than $10. And again, voluntary basis. So DoD employees may not accept a gift from a donating group if the value of the gift exceeds $300. The $10 limitation still applies. Honoraria. So let's say you graduated from the University of South Carolina and you're invited to come to be the keynote speaker for a graduation. Honoraria, let's say they offer to pay you. Now, it depends on what capacity you're going. So, for example, if you're asked by a college to speak and you attend in your official military capacity, if they mention anything about your military duty, you are Major John Jones, then you are not allowed to accept payment for that speech. If they call you and they want you to speak because you're a graduate of that university or college, and that's simply the level of detail, then you may accept. But again, when it comes to not knowing what to do, you want to go to your ethical official to get it in writing, a greater understanding and approval of what it is that you're accepting. Post-employment. So let's say you work for the government now and you interact with contracts with a vendor. There are two restrictions for government employees involving specific parties they were involved with while working for the government. If the employees were personally involved with a company while working for the government, that employer or employee is permanently barred from representing that company to the government. So you can't then leave the government, then go work for that company, and then turn around and bid on a contract based on your knowledge because you work with the government. So you are permanently barred. And I think this statement is a little different from what was in the older study guide. So ensure that you pay attention here. Permanently barred. If you had any personal dealings with that company, you can't then interact and represent that company to the government on any matter, the similar matter. And if the matter was under the employee's responsibility, it was in my office, but I was not the one dealing with the contract directly during the last year of working for the government, then the individual is barred for 2 years after leaving government service. So those are your short ethical things that you need to point out. And that was manpower management. And I will see you guys again next time. Be sure to subscribe so you'll get updates when I continue to update information on the YouTube channel.